Okay, you're all set? So one key word and one key phrase. IoT is the key word. What does it mean? How do we architect? Key phrase, leading that as a revolution in India. What, again, why we need it, how do you do it? People to machine, machine to machine, all kinds of communications have been going on, and today we're talking about really IoT, which is nothing but smart connections of smart things. And we have seen in machine-to-machine world how things work. But what's the fundamental difference? We saw that how devices sensing, control, communications, this M2M was all about automation. Whereas this IoT, when we bring in, and some of these people refer as IoE, we are really talking about analytics, predictions, forecasting services. We mean business. We want to monetize and make some real sense out of these development. If we look into how we architect, there is fundamental things. First thing is the infrastructure. And infrastructure is of two types. You have this hardware, sensors, devices. This is one kind of infrastructure. And you have the hub. These devices talk to. You have a gateway, clouds. All of those are infrastructure. So there is a set of companies working fundamentally on both kinds of infrastructure. If you think of the next layer, which is the communication, you can sense that all the connectivity, Bluetooth, Zigbee, Wi-Fi, name it, and that's also a basis. You cannot have an IoT services without that. But these two specific things cannot make money. So that's where the third thing comes, which is the applications and services, which is there, right? So as we talk about leading IoT revolution in India, I mean, just to tell my perspective of why it's very, very important. First of all, if you see these three things, hardware, you have the connectivity, which is telecom, and then software and services. So we can perceive this and paraphrase it more like an interplay of these three elements. So this is a beautiful opportunity. The second thing is, government has been talking about the smart cities, drafting IoT policies, digital India. So all of these, meaning you can have a smart grid, you can have smart parking, intelligent transport systems, water management, waste management. We don't have these. Many of the developed nations have it. And so it's an opportunity. This gives a framework for us to get there. And that tells why it is not an evolution, it's a revolution, because we are leapfrogging. The way we did that in the telephone world, we moved it out from 30 million as it went to 40 million, the mobile had surpassed. Same way, today, the interconnected devices have way back in 2011 surpassed the number of people that's there in this planet. So it's very, very important. With that, I would like to open with the panelists. And first thing with Ashwani, if you could say, what do you see as the current state of IoT in India?
I think when I look at IoT, let me start from the world first. I think even if you look at the world stage, right, it really seems to be just the beginning. And I believe India is really no different, right? It's just starting up. That being said, I think it's also, I see extreme amount of excitement. I mean, there are lots and lots of people building lots and lots of different applications. And what's very encouraging from my perspective is that I see applications that are ranging from consumer IoT applications, and including even wearables that are generally associated only with developed world today, where you can actually see some products right here in this conference, which are actually wearable products, to home products. And again, there are at least 2 or 3 examples right here about in-home products that, again, is something that probably, you wouldn't want to relate India with as a starting point. There are products in enterprise. And of course, we all know of smart cities, and there are lots of POCs and experiments that are actually happening, even in smart cities or government kind of a space in IoT. So What's very exciting from my point of view is that it seems like there are a lot of experiments that are happening in a very wide variety of IoT applications, right? That being said, many of them are either in some kind of a pilot or proof of concept stage. People are really trying to figure out, their initial set of customers. Some early successes, and we need to really build upon that, right? And there are, of course, there are barriers that we probably are going to talk about today, and that's probably something that we'll probably spend enough time talking about today.
Nigel, you have been visiting India very frequently, right? Any perspective on that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for me. I mean, I've just very, very briefly. I mean, Stream Technologies provides connectivity purely for machine-to-machine Internet of Things, and we have been doing since the year 2000. So I've got a 14-year overview of connectivity and Internet of Things, mostly on a global basis in the past few years, and that's across wireless technologies such as cellular, 2G, 3G, and satellite, and low-power radio networks as well. So as I said, I've been visiting India on and off since probably the year 2005, 2006. And until very recently, for me, it's been extremely difficult to engage with mobile network operators and some of the largest service source systems integrators in terms of getting them to understand the importance of a connectivity platform, which we use, a connectivity management and enablement platform. Because this really is, the glue. It's the glue that allows everything to be connected and everything to work. And to manage large volumes of connected devices and sensors needs automation. It needs a platform.
Sure.
And it's only in the past 12 months to 2 years that I've actually seen a relaxation and an acceptance that, okay, right, we get it. We know that we need to play in a field that's got, we talk about maybe 20 or 50 billion devices. It doesn't matter. The number's huge by 2020. And the acceptance of that and the way to get to those figures is on a collaborative basis. And I think that's starting to happen. That's my kind of general feeling from just dipping in and out of the IoT sector in India over the last few years.
Just to add, I think the first important thing from what you call it from appliance or energy sector, we just probably have sold about 1 million components which went into energy meters which is deployed in India. So that's an indication that things are happening. The real test is like how do you make something out of it, like some kind of a value proposition wherein you could come up with a demand-based power tariffs or something like that. That is an important point at which these things are like 1 million is a good enough parts, and Maharashtra is the first state to start with it. The second point is ARNET, the Department of Information and Technology, or Modi's 100-day requirements, pulled in some 20-30 different experts of the industry and came up with the first white paper on IoT, which has some details on picking up 10 different vectors where they want to invest in, and I would probably go into more details. I think there are subsequent questions on it.
So if I correctly understand very briefly, there are a few things like you talked about, smart meters, in-home devices. These are the places we are doing. In a sense, maybe we are not calling IoT, but we are there. Whereas probably the next step of enterprise or smart cities, that's a mile to catch up on that.
No, actually, I think that there is a lot of, in fact, work, I believe, that is happening in enterprise area. And in fact, it's actually fantastic to see. I personally believe that industrial internet is a huge opportunity and probably the first few set of areas where people can actually make money. Because there are a lot of inefficiencies, particularly related to India. The way industries in India have grown, right? Labor cost typically has been cheap, right? And if you take that into account, that essentially meant that your top problem wasn't really to worry about the efficiency in rest of different processes, right? So as it's catching up, right, you really have to worry about how to bring efficiency. And there are a lot of low-hanging fruits, and I'm actually very encouraged to see people figuring out business process transformations through IoT, Whether it's about energy saving, we just talked about one as an example. Whether it's about bringing some kind of efficiency in logistics, some kind of efficiency in maintaining equipments that are being used. So I'm seeing all kind of examples. In fact, where I'm seeing people really starting to make money is probably more in this segment than others. I'm not suggesting that people are not starting to make money in consumer and other areas, but in general, let's say that's not such an easy to come by sort of an area.
So Nigel, what does it take to take this IoT for future? What are the ecosystem ingredients that probably have to play in unison?
Sure. I think high quality, value for money solutions in themselves, so the device manufacture and the application layer that overlays that. So it's got to be a product that and a service that does what it says on the tin at the right price. I think then you have to have a wide range of telecoms wireless options, right through from 2G to 3, 4G, and Wi-Fi hotspots. I think that, Wi-Fi hotspot operators will be a large beneficiary eventually of the Internet of Things devices and sensors. So that then predicates the fact that you need a connectivity management layer as well, and a tool to manage across different network brands, across different network infrastructures, but from a single portal, from a single easy to manage tool. Once you start to get all these ingredients into the mix, it starts to become a very viable proposition. And that's what we've seen certainly in the UK and Europe over the last few years, which are not regulated to this in the same way as, for example, India. We're allowed to have MVNOs and service providers specializing in IoT and M2M. And so there's been a certain degree of technical innovation with regards to the connectivity layer that can now be applied in other parts of the world, and I believe in India certainly.
In terms of the IoT, the standard bodies, there are many of them are coming up. And obviously, they play a role. If it's a Smart Home Alliance, it has its own focus. If it's a car consortium, it has its own focus. But do you see, while implementing your connectivity solutions for enterprise or otherwise, that there are hurdles?
I think, well, we've taken an agnostic viewpoint. So we're open, and we're agnostic towards different wireless technologies. So we really don't care what the technology is, as long as you can identify the end device using a MAC address or an IP address. As long as we can identify the end sensor, the end device, it doesn't matter. We can manage the comms layer to that device in terms of the near field and then the backhaul out from a gateway. But it's an interesting question because there's an awful lot of work being done around different standards, different bodies around the world. Just in the UK, there's a number of bodies. But also you've got some of the core module and chip manufacturers. For example, ARM, which designed the chips for Apple, has recently announced its Embed OS system for the Internet of Things. So again, all we do is we integrate into that and bring it into the connectivity ecosystem, if you like. So it's been pulled and pushed from various directions. I think it'll settle.
Nagaraj?
I think here, as Nigel said, we are going to have multiple standards. That is something for sure. We have seen it in audio, we have seen it in video. There is nothing called as one standard. It's up to when we are coming up with products, how do you adapt, coming up with, as Nigel mentioned, let's start at the sensor level, how are you coming up with the gateways where it can take any kind of interface. It could be a Zigbee from a mesh network or a Wi-Fi or a BLE. How do you create that and connect to the cloud? Again, for the cloud, there are multiple guys coming up with standards, there's IBM standard, MQTT, there is Apple coming up with HomeKit, and there is Thread, there's another standard with the Samsung colleague. I need to mention that.
We also have an OIC.
OIC. There are in 6 months, there were 4 different consortiums which came together. So I think it's important when you're doing a product, even for a sensor, how do you make it adaptable? That's one important thing. I think the next thing which we need to think about is when we mention about 20 billion or 30 billion or 50 billion connected devices, security is going to be a big important thing. It's a different thing when you're looking at your plant, whether what is the humidity level of your ground, that data, it doesn't matter, versus like if it's a data going on somebody's health information, that's something we need to worry about. How are you handling security? Same goes on the industrial. There are a lot of discussion going on with this industrial 4.0 standards, which is globally being adapted. Now, how do you bring it to India? The third thing we need to think is, how do you adapt to already existing systems? Like, for example, in our current industry, as Ashwani mentioned, there are things which are wired. Now, how do you come up with, like we call it as examples, like serial Wi-Fi or a wireless connection using the standard Ethernet or UART or whatever connection, and make it enabled for IoT? Those are different things which we need to work on. And same way, if you go with, I mentioned about RNet on a standard perspective, they have identified about 8 or 10 sections where we need to invest in India from standards perspective, and there are efforts happening. And here I want to bring up to the people in this room is, like, instead of us all talking here, let's use the trade bodies like NASSCOM and Zeno to bring in an awareness about all the different companies working in this IoT. IoT means multiple things, from sensor to infrastructure to equipment provider to what you call a service provider to policy maker to multiple. I may have missed many things here. How do we bring these people in India together and bring in first awareness and next look at, one guy cannot be doing everything. How do you bring in that collaboration is something which is important, which people in this room need to be thinking about. That is an important thing from a, what do we do from a standard or collaboration? That's a point I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I think just building upon what Nagaraj said, and I think Alok, you also started with it. I think IoT is a very, and everybody wants to build a solution, right? And that's what brings value to your customer. It's a very complex value chain, right? I mean, you have to start from hardware. Even though you may realize in most applications that over a period of time, maybe the value isn't with hardware, but you have to start with hardware. It means you got to figure out your prototyping strategy to manufacturing strategy. Then comes the telco operators and connectivity piece, right? Which are part of the important, in fact, one of the most important part of the value chain. And then comes, I think, probably the kind of world, at least in India, probably we are very familiar with, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's about cloud applications, and of course, analytics now catching up, right? I think for anybody, and and I speak, even though I'm part of Intel and we are a fairly large setup, but for anybody to kind of think in, I'll do everything from scratch, I think it's just too much of an undertaking. And I think it's very important that we realize, where do we want to add value in this solution, and how do we want to add value, and make sure we collaborate with others who are good at bringing their value add and actually put together a solution. Otherwise, it's just take forever to get something out there, and become worse and worse if you go more towards consumer, which hardware also needs to be sophisticated. It needs to have form factor. Probably have to have 5 iterations before you're going to get it right? So all of those things are very important. Now, from a standards point of view, while I'm coming from Intel, I love standards, right? But I also tend to generally have a little bit of a contrarian view, in the sense that generally I see evolution of industries happening in a certain way, right? Typically, the first thing you want to be worried about is, can I create applications that solve somebody's problem, and they start to buy it, right? And then comes the part that, different people are selling different solutions to the same customer, and we can't talk to each other. Now, we can't get to the next level of solution or next level of value add to the customer, right? So I think there are a lot of standards, as everybody pointed out, are being talked about. Over a period of time, things will settle down. So wherever it's possible for you to quickly latch on to a particular standard, do that, build solutions. to the extent possible, be open to share the data with other systems so that you can collaborate at that next level. But don't wait for standards to come in before
So what
you
you're
get
saying
going,
is
right?
work with the de facto
Right.
standard and let the standards evolve on the sideline. Effectively, what happens is, one is the connectivity level of standards. Then you have these verticals, you know, the home, car, health, whatever it is. So you will have people working on those as working groups or different bodies. And then you also have a broader problems, which is not so in silos, but how do you do the data management? How do you do the database management? How do you maintain redundancy when so many devices will be connecting and some of them may die and you still need that data, right? It may be a little inferior, but you still want to operate that way. How do you maintain the security that he talked about? So these are fundamental problems which are specific to IoT, whereas the others probably are ingredients to that. So with that, I mean, you have been talking about these 10 pillars or the Indian IoT policy. Could you highlight a bit more on the policy side? What should we change to lead this as a revolution? That's very important because we are not talking about just doing it, talking about leading it.
I think the 10, like basically ARNet group picked 10 different things. I may not name all of them. One is like Bangaloreans would like smart parking, okay. And there is, of course, smart home. There is
water management.
Water management. There's smart grid. There is digital signage. There is like what you call healthcare stuff. There is what you call like security for women, children, or dementia patient. How do you come up with this?
Agriculture.
Agriculture is another thing wherein it's a part of the water management. These are things which is being started as key ones, and NASSCOM is very active in it, wherein these 10 different examples, they want to come up with the incubation center or development centers where there is some funding coming from the government, some funding coming from other places, where you create solutions or demos wherein that can be adapted across the country. That is one vector where there is a lot of investment going on. The next thing is there is investments being talked about on how do we represent in the world standards and make sure we adapt things right for India. For example, he talked about interoperability, as well as one more bigger thing in power sector is the theft. I mean, how do you come up with standards in India, because that is a big challenge, like how do you manage that? So those are things being discussed. There is also some initiatives taken from an education perspective, because if you want to, you need to have people who are operators who can do IoT stuff to exotic architects who can define the whole requirements for the country. So those are few activities. You can go Google it, you'll find those standards available. But here is an opportunity where if there are like-minded people who we can get together and start thinking about how we influence the standards, because there have been few companies have been invited by the government to help, but I know through NASSCOM we could do more about it. So.
Any comment to supplement?
Yeah, I think clearly the IoT policy that that I believe the draft is out and still I think comments are awaited. It has highlighted some very important pillars, particularly in the area of creating these demo zones where, you know, people can come out, do co-investments, can display stuff. But I also believe that, you know, for IoT to accelerate, there are a bunch of other areas that are probably going to get covered based on the feedback from the industry or already in works in other departments. For example, the area of telco, I think it's an extremely important area that also needs to get addressed. And what I mean by that, right? I think clearly a policy that is driven towards just the voice connections, right, is not going to work in M2M IoT world, right? Whether it starts from the KYC norms or whether it starts from, you know, how do you make sure that as a solution supplier you can get connectivity across pan-India without having to deal with multiple operators. Somebody touched here MVNO and, you know, those kind of policy flexibilities to make some of those things happen. I think those are also going to play equally important role. Perhaps not in every application, right? I mean, if you're at home, probably, you know, you're riding on the network already available at home. But many, many applications, I mean, somebody talked about automotive application. I'm not aware of almost any automotive application. Perhaps automotive application is the worst of its kind because you need a WAN connectivity and you need it on the move, right? So there are, you know, we need to address things in that area. We need to clearly address things in the area of security and privacy. I mean, today, maybe as a society, we are probably more lenient than many other societies where it's okay if I take the data and do whatever I want to do with it, right? But I think it's going to become serious, where it's going to be very important that, you know, it's not just about you getting my consent through a very big set of forms that I can't even probably read, but it's really about you as a solution provider. Do you have adequate controls in place to really make sure you store, you manage, you make sure your data integrity is correct, and, you know, are there appropriate regulations in place, right? So spectrum, I mean, all of these IoT stuff is going to be data intensive stuff. Do we have enough spectrum? Do we need to unlock more, right? So there are lots of those kind of areas that I think also need to be addressed.
I guess one point is to lead in this, choose the problems that are important in our life. He gave certain examples, and you are also talking about in a different way some of the problems that we have. So how do you circumvent that and solve our problems? That would be the first step to take. At this point, is there any question from audience? Yes, please.
What is the state of the global market for IoT, and which country is leading in terms of adoption of IoT in its overall ecosystem? What I'm saying is which country? We talked about India most of the time, but I'm sure there is a lot more development happening in other parts of the globe, and this seems to be a very global type of you know, opportunity in that sense. So I'm sure, you know, for example, manufacturers must be embedding a lot of sensors in their equipment, and these are all global companies in that sense. So which is the country which is adopted? So that is not maybe the problem. The problem may be related to other things that we talked about in terms of the local ecosystem, availability of telco, you know, connectivity, and basically infrastructure and policy kind of areas. So which is the country which has adopted it the best?
The US, China, and Korea. These are the definitely the top three, probably.
Japan also comes follows. Again, it depends on which IoT sector you're talking. I mean, it's sector based. Like if you're talking about smart energy, US, Europe, Japan has adapted it quite effectively. I mean, it's demand based charging or monitoring, all that stuff. Second thing is it's like street lighting, all that stuff. I believe in like in Norway, like every highways, they have already started adapting in few places where you have a motion sensing based, like one pole talks to the other pole, so the lights come up, like, okay, those are things which are coming up. So those are like, there are sectors where it's being adapted in different countries, but most of it, if you see, there is still a big chunk of it going to wearables, because that's wearables. It's the personal stuff, so that is
today we are targeting is about USD $15 billion for India in 2020. That's a target that we have, and that should be around 7 to 8% of the global market at that time. That is the target that government is setting, looking out for that. Quite ambitious, but that's what it is.
But the question you asked, I think, is very relevant. You know, so given the circumstance of India and the kind of areas where this can give bang for the buck, in a way of speaking, which is, you know, you talked about 10 different areas which government is prioritizing. Which is the one which we think, 2 or 3, which should be actually be the focus area for India's requirements and development needs?
I think the vector where there is a lot of traction is, one is on the smart grid or smart energy. Basically, power is a problem. I mean, how do you smartly do things? Like, I mean, that is a big thing. Without going into details, I can see we are running out of time. Second thing is on the water management or agriculture or looking at the humidity level. Currently, it's flood irrigation, what we do. Translate that to drip irrigation. That's just a big thing because water is a big thing. Okay? And I would say third is the healthcare. And that is a rural healthcare, remote healthcare. That's a factor of 3 vectors.
See, broadly, whenever we do these kinds of analysis, just to conclude, is that there are different types of benefits of IoT. Some talks about seamless movement, right? You move from home to car to office. This is one kind of scenario. You talk about efficiency, so that's the light, and this is the story. You talk about personalized information for yourself. So there are these different cuts. One of the key challenges that is there with the IoT is that people talk about we have to make money. But the difficulty there is, in this case, many examples are there. We don't have time today. We can talk offline, where the user is one, decision maker is another, and payment is going from a third party. This is where the complexity lies, and we need to solve that. And this is where a lot of associations and discussions has to happen to take this forward. And this is a great opportunity for India because there is this development. We have been doing services and outsourcing. This is an opportunity for building small products, right? It doesn't have to be big products. You can be innovative. So that's a good opportunity. If we think about in terms of the research, there are elements, security in IoT and many others in database, data structure, the compression technologies that you can do and build our research centers. And if you talk about new business development, that's definitely there for the businessman. But also finally what it does is through all of these, we effectively improve our lifestyle, have smart homes, smart buildings, smart cities, that kind of thing. So I guess with that note, I will conclude it. We are over time, so we can continue discussing.
Sure.
But we'll have to stop here.
Thank you so much, panelists, for that glimpse into what the future holds for us.